Hi, I'm Louise, I'm Frank's mum.
I'm Mike, I'm Frank's dad.
I'm Maisie and I'm Frank's sister.
We want to tell you a little bit about Frank today. Frank was 11 years old when he was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, which is a form of bone cancer. 2.5 years later, when Frank was just 14, he died.
In a lot of ways, Frank was very much a normal teenager. He was lively, he had a great sense of humour, he loved all sports, he loved his friends, he loved socialising, he was very outgoing. He was really everything you'd want your son to be, I think.
Since Frank died, we found out loads more about him, and the things that have really come across from messages from his friends is how kind and how funny he was, and I think he was a great friend to lots of people.
Frank really loved the cinema, he really enjoyed going to the theatre. He spent a lot of time in Nando's with his friends. I think his friends and his family were probably the most important thing to him, especially in the last 3 years of his life.
Yeah, when we first found out about what Frank's diagnosis, I remember I was sitting in the office and I got a call. He was away at an Outward Bound week with his school, and he'd been there a night. He'd been really looking forward to it for ages, and he'd woken up with a lump on his back. And I remember the teacher phoned me up and said, the first word she said was, "There's nothing to worry about." So obviously, reassured, I went up there. I picked him up and took him to the hospital. He had an X-ray. They couldn't really see anything wrong other than normal, but this didn't go away, and for 2 months we were backwards and forwards to hospital and was getting progressively worse. Eventually we got the diagnosis that Frank had Ewing sarcoma, which is a form of bone cancer. Obviously it was devastating news for us, but we stayed positive, and Frank was faced with a really enormous cycle of chemotherapy. 18 cycles of chemotherapy lasted a year. He also, we all had to go to America, to Oklahoma, where he had proton radiotherapy for 2 months. After the proton radiotherapy, he was taken to Birmingham Hospital, where he had huge surgery to remove the tumour, and at the same time remove a large portion of his hip. Which basically meant that he had to really learn to walk again from scratch, all of which he did with incredible courage, good nature, good spirit, and real determination. And at this stage, Frank had almost, learned to walk again, finished the chemotherapy, and we were just so relieved, and we went away on holiday. Unfortunately, on holiday, he developed some pain in his arm, and when we came back we had that scanned to find that the cancer had come back. At that stage we were given the devastating news that the prognosis was really terminal, and that the best we could hope for was that we could prolong Frank's life for a year or two.
I think the most shocking thing for us when it came back was to find out that there isn't really any treatment when it comes back. And I think also it was at that point that we realised that the treatment that Frank got for the first year hasn't changed in 40 years, because there's so little research into bone cancer. I think that's the thing that really shocked us, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to explain how we carried on, but more importantly, how Frank carried on during that period.
I think it's worth saying how positive Frank was throughout the whole thing. I remember him saying, when he was getting his port removed, when we thought he was better, that he said to the doctor that he'd go back to Oklahoma and have all his radiotherapy again if it meant that he could see the friends that he met in Oklahoma and live in Oklahoma for another 2 months.
Yeah, so and Frank basically was faced with more chemotherapy, which was really at this stage beginning to take a toll on his body. And he still kept going until just before Christmas, 14 months ago, I guess now. And at that stage, it really started deteriorating fairly rapidly. We had our last Christmas together, our last days out. He had his last trips to cinema with his friends, and he passed away early February last year. And at that stage, we knew that we wanted to do something to mark his passing and his life, and to prove that it hadn't been in vain, and that we, hopefully, out of something so terrible, could try and resurrect something positive, which is why we set up Frank's Fund, to address the fact that investment and research in bone cancer has been completely overlooked, and really particularly by the mainstream charities, who just really pay lip service to the research, and you know, we felt we could do something and make a difference, and that's why we set Frank's Fund up.
And also, I think the other really important thing for us about setting up Frank's Fund is that we want to keep his memory alive, and we don't ever want people to forget about Frank, because he was a really special boy.